Hi, I'm Larry Dignan with Constellation Insights, and we're here with Karen Higgins-Carter. She's been a CIO multiple times, serves on some boards. She's had stints at Gilbane Building, Webster Bank, MFUG, and various GE divisions. Hi, Karen. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me.
And so we've been doing a tour with the Constellation Research AI 150, and just wanted to catch up with you on some practical AI and talk about some boardroom issues and things like that. So I guess let's just start at the top. How are you? You used to be an operator for a while. How are you advising boards when it comes to approaching AI?
Well, I think one thing to know is that it's a common opportunity across sectors. I think if you think about, say, Amazon, for example, what comes to mind first is a very technology heavy digital company, and they have a very physical aspect to that business: warehouses, planes, trucks, logistics. When you think about construction at the other end of the spectrum, you think about a very physical business, that the product, first and foremost, is a physical product. But there's a tremendous amount of information flow that is involved in the delivery of the product. Same with pharma and same with financial services, that there's always a balance between a digital and information flow aspect of that business, as well as a physical aspect of that business. So making sure that you're thinking about the opportunity holistically and not necessarily from a biased point of view about what business are you in is what I would say is a starting point.
So are boardrooms more interested in sort of that physical AI kind of play now? I mean, because there's so many industries that haven't, last 2 years have really been about AI and productivity gains and, sort of creative fields. I guess what's your take on AI going into the, physical world more?
I would say what boards are most interested in is what their shareholders expect them to do, which is to pick the right sectors for that business to participate in, understand how they're positioned in those sectors, how they'll succeed in the short term and create value in the long term, manage unit economics. I don't think any of that changes necessarily with AI. Boards are interested from a strong point of business acumen. What are the practical opportunities in the experiments that the management team is pursuing? And concurrent with that, what are the inherent risks and how are they managing those?
So in terms of what you're seeing in the field, and not only that, when you were a CIO, how do you choose whether to build your own AI? I guess what's the buy versus build equation here?
Yeah, I think it's getting to your roots in terms of what you are. If you don't currently participate in the technology sector and you don't have that as a core competency, I think starting with buying and partnering with other companies to develop a capability is a place to start. It's where you can get some near-term value. It's also where you can explore how it is operationalized within your company. How do roles change? What roles go away? What are the impacts for or the implications for workforce planning? As well as then how do you commercialize it? So how do you realize the value over time? How do your end customers adopt it? I think so. The easiest way to get there is to start by buying AI and then think about, is there an opportunity for real differentiation that we can fund and afford over time by creating our own?
So when you were a CIO, I guess what was the mix of buy versus build?
By and large, almost all buy, simply
Okay.
because in the sectors I've worked in, between financial services, in the mid-sized bank space, in construction, pharma, it is not technology companies. They are companies that benefit greatly from technology and data and AI, but are not set up in a way that you can allocate sufficient capital to really have a sustainable differentiation by developing your own, at least not at this point in time. And so I've always seen the model that works best is where corporates can contribute their knowledge of the industry, their data, and partner with the right venture capital company, with their portfolio companies, and other partners to develop something unique at the intersection of those three things. And that's where I found the best operating model, not necessarily putting yourself at the center of it and having to make it all yourself, but partnering with others who bring the depth of technology knowledge that's needed. But most startups, they don't have a product without data from a corporate partner. And they don't necessarily have the depth of industry knowledge to really understand the application of AI and all of the commercial benefits and the operationalization factors that need to be addressed. And so it's through that partnership that you can very efficiently get started and learn.
How do you advise boards in terms of bridging that gap between, I guess the hype and the reality? Like I know, 2024 was, boards were like, what are we doing on AI? And not necessarily, thought through. Has that gap closed a bit in terms of, I guess what they're asking for and what they read in the headlines?
Yeah, I think it's changing. I think what I have seen practically is we're seeing AI automate tasks, but not necessarily automate roles. And so it brings the question about in terms of what are we really trying to achieve here and what value do we have line of sight to. So I see a more tailored approach to what are the, say, top 3, top 5 use cases, and let's bring those all the way through the process. So let's go through due diligence. Let's understand what the inherent risks are. Who does this not work for? And is that in line with our values? Then operationalizing it. Do we have to restructure some aspects of our workforce in order to eliminate roles? And I'm not advocating that that is a great objective for AI, but I think it is the reality that we have to proactively adapt the workforce and support people in transitioning into roles that will exist in the future. And then finally, how do we commercialize this experiment? How do we realize the benefit? How do we get customers to adopt it? How do we get our workforce to adopt it in a way that we realize the initial business case? So I think the focus has changed from running lots of prototypes and being in kind of prototype purgatory to taking a few use cases all the way through that process so you can really pilot the learnings that you get through experimentation.
How do you see agentic AI developing over the next year and change?
Yeah, I think it'll be more so, and this is just, off the top of my head, more so deployed in less regulated industries. I don't have any inside information, but I don't necessarily see it deployed in areas that are traditionally more heavily regulated. For example, if you look at the EU AI Act, classifies use cases into risk levels. Credit decisioning has always been an area, even pre-AI hype, where a focus on explainability for consumer credit has been front and center. I see the same thing for agentic AI, that understanding and being able to trust decisions that are made by an agent and not a human. And there is bias, in that scrutiny on the agent, not necessarily just on the human. But I see that evolving more slowly in more regulated spaces than not. But it's going to come down to adoption. That is where the value, I think, will be created or not created in terms of what are consumers willing to adopt and how are you going to shape your workforce in a way that you get the value.
Yeah, I think right now a lot of the discussions about agentic AI really revolves around digital labor, and which is kind of code for getting rid of some jobs. it's sort of couched in you can scale and hire more people, digital people. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch that play out.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a bias that we have right now in terms of agentic AI supporting the workforce and augmenting people's roles and making better roles. I think we have to face the reality that as a general purpose technology, it will change the shape of the workforce over time. And it's a moral obligation for teams to prepare the workforce for that eventuality. I think in the same way that there isn't a typist pool anymore. That capability is now decentralized because of word processing. Same thing with graphics. If you remember in the olden days, the centralized graphics team that did everybody's graphics. And now we have a few specialized teams that may work on proposals that are augmented by AI, but by and large, people are expected to understand PowerPoint and write their own presentations. I see the same thing with software development in terms of the evolution of software development becoming a more common skill with the right guardrails to ensure that you're producing a high quality and secure product. And I think we're doing people a disservice if we shy away from that eventuality, and that being people first is about first working in reality of where the workforce is going and supporting people in transitioning to the future, because the future comes. We can't necessarily predict when and exactly where, and it'll come in an uneven way. But setting that expectation that roles will change and we may need fewer of these types of roles, but we need more of these roles, and how people can participate in the future is a fundamental to human capital management.
So, what's the role of change management? It's an oldie but a goodie, but I've heard it come up in AI projects basically for the last year. Like just some of that blocking and tackling in terms of change management, because the labor force, your workers are freaked out, and if the change management isn't there, I guess what are some of the best practices boardrooms and operators need to think about?
Yeah, I would say really two things. I think first, starting from a future back perspective, like painting a shared picture of, or I should say, a shared hypothesis of what you believe the future may look like. And then looking at the first steps that you're taking through the lens of that future, and is it moving you there? I think often a trap to fall into is this stream of consciousness technology investment and development. Like, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And I think a lot of startups really feed that dynamic within larger corporate customers, where you can see a specific use case via product-led growth that is amplified by their sources of capital, that it's easy to fall into the trap of just pursuing multiple use cases that come your way via that channel. And you can upset a lot of the workforce if they don't necessarily have a picture of the future and you're working backwards from there. So I think getting the approach right can help smooth the change management challenges. Secondly, I think there's two things. I think strategy needs to be a broad-based exercise. I think the evolution of the technology state is critically important. The evolution and the robustness of your data environments, your data architecture, your data control frameworks are fundamental to executing any strategy in the future state. I think, though, it's important to pivot to ensuring that then you can execute. What slows people down, in my experience, is when you have a culture where anybody can veto what the strategic direction is. And so doing both of those things in parallel, painting a hypothesis of the picture of the future, working backwards to then how does that inform the experiments that we want to do today, understanding the impacts on the workforce, having a broad-based set of inputs into strategic planning, things that you haven't necessarily considered in the past, and then ensuring that it's not immovable. You can still evolve it, but you don't fall into a trap of anybody can veto it.
All righty. Any final words or thoughts to add?
I would say, the last thought I'm a risk manager at heart, and risk management is about taking the right risks, not taking no risks. And particularly with AI, the first question that any of us should ask is, for whom does this not work? And are we okay with that? So understanding what risks are and how to mitigate those. And then is that in line with our values? I have heard that, the biggest risk is not taking a risk. I think the biggest risk is taking a risk that you don't know that you're taking. So the basics of enterprise risk management, risk identification, and mitigation, such that you can be an enabler, is critical to the success of any strategy.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Larry.